Welcome to the Global Discussion, discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. Today, I'm joined by Reena Friedman Watts. Absolutely delighted that Reena's here. Let's begin by asking Reena, introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about the journey and this creative world that you're involved in. So over to you, Reena.
I am so excited to be considered a creative, a leader, and a thinker. I love all of those things. So, I was actually going to introduce myself with the word creative. I love the creative community. I got my start at the Jerry Springer show. That was my first job out of college, and that was quite the creative experience. I went from intern to associate producer to producer. So I learned all the ins and outs of that show. And it was quite an experience that people love talking to me about. I didn't even realize how big of an opportunity that was or how crazy that experience was really until much later, until I left the place. But that is what started my career. Then I moved to LA kind of at the start of reality TV. And I worked for VH1 and E, and I got to travel on the road. And I kind of found what I liked about the production world and ventured into post production. The last show that I worked on in LA was Nanny 911. I worked on that show from season 1 through season 3. And one thing I love about working in production is seeing an idea from the beginning all the way to fruition. It's kind of like a startup. You have this idea and you have a bunch of editors and writers and people in the field and then it comes together and it becomes like a well-oiled ship. And then by the third season, you just need the right guests. Like it's a really beautiful process. And now I've kind of gone from my production roots to helping people create their own podcasts. So now I have entrepreneurs that reach out to me and they're like, I have this idea and I need help with graphics and I need help telling my story and I need help finding the guests. And I love that because I've been able to take my skills from production into this now podcasting trend and help people be creative. So not only am I a podcaster, the host of the Better Call Daddy show, which is a podcast where I interview guests, share the stories with my dad, like a good daughter does, get my dad's advice after. But I'm also helping other people create their shows as well, which I absolutely love doing.
Well, Reena, thank you for that. And look, we've got to go back for a moment. I know you get asked about it a lot, but we've got to go back to Jerry Springer, right? That was huge. I mean, that was a juggernaut of a production. So how did you get into production in the first place, even prior to that? What sort of led you down that path?
Yeah, I actually worked at an NPR station in college. And the best part about that was when I got to be in the booth by myself because I would play music and I'd get creative and I'd take these stories that came over the news wire and I tried to figure out how I could make them more interesting and kind of in my own voice and my own bits. And I was creating air check tapes at night. And then I went to the career services office at Purdue University. I was like, how do I get an interview at a real radio station? And so I drove up to Chicago and I interviewed at WGN, thanks to the alumni office at Purdue, and I didn't get the job. So I had stars in my eyes, but it didn't come together. But while I was up there, I saw that Jerry Springer was looking for interns in the same courtyard. There was a flyer like on a bulletin board. And so I walked over from the Tribune Tower to NBC Tower and told them I had an interview with the intern coordinator. Got the guy on the phone. They let me through security and I started 2 weeks later.
That's incredible. That's incredible. And that's where the journey started then, obviously. So, the other thing I wanted to ask you about is you said that a lot of that sort of experience that you've picked up as a producer, working on different shows, etc., radio, TV, production, that's all been transferred now. Do you think those skills transferred easily into what you do now? Were they a great foundation for you? Because everybody today, the tools that we have available today, to some degree, you don't need the multi-million-dollar studio today, right? Even consumer grade tools are really high spec now compared to maybe what we were using then, right?
Oh my God, even compared to what we were doing 10 years ago, 15 years ago. I mean, it's crazy. You can get broadcast level equipment on the cheap or very reasonable and set up your own studio You can cast your own amazing guests. And if you start to grow a community, you can really reach almost anyone. Yeah.
100%. Yeah, 100%. And look, for people maybe listening to this, I'm going to explain to them, but for people watching it, they can see it. You've got a lovely image behind you, the Better Call Daddy podcast, the Better Call Daddy show. Tell us a little bit more about that, because I really love how at the end your dad gets to chime in on and sort of reflect on what you're talking about. But for people maybe that aren't as familiar with it as I am, or just listening to this, could you just maybe unpack that show a little bit for us?
Yeah. So my dad has always been my number one supporter, biggest fan. And I just knew he wouldn't back out on me. And not only that, but he's a total character. So I thought that he, kind of like Jerry Springer, is where I got the idea that he could weigh in and kind of summarize each interview and give his intergenerational perspective. I really feel like the family unit is changed today. And like we really need to bring family back to the forefront. And I have found that a lot of people love the relationship that I have with my dad. They're curious about it, and it's something that can't be replicated. So I feel like it's a unique selling factor. And I also feel like by my dad listening to the interviews, it's almost like us reading the same book, but instead we listen to the same podcast interview and then we discuss it for the first time as our reaction at the end of the episode. And so it's almost like my gift to the guest. Like, what's your daddy going to say? Is he going to approve of me? Is he going to give me some pushback? Is he going to answer my question? I'm
Yeah,
always a little bit nervous. Like, are they going to like my dad? Are they going to be offended by him? Are they going to give him something good?
yeah, and we're kind of waiting for dad's views, right? We're kind of waiting on it, It's really, really good. And you, at the time of recording this, I think you're around coming up to around the 3-year mark. Is that right?
That is right. Yes. And I've done around 300 episodes. The first year I was kind of a maniac and I was releasing 3 a week. I was just loving the whole process, but then it got a little bit crazy once I started to get clients that wanted me to do that for them too. So I then cut back to 2 a week, and now I am at a solid 1 to 2 a week, and it feels good. And you know what? Everybody's like, "Oh, pick your release days so people get used to your schedule." I'm like, "You know what? I do what works for me and it's still working well." So I don't even really subscribe to that. Like for my season opener, I had been releasing like Monday, Wednesday, or Friday. I released the season opener on a Thursday. I was like, "Ooh, let's mix it up. Let's see what that does," and each season too, I change the opener. Sometimes I change the outro each episode. I do a custom intro after I interview the guest and after me and my dad have a conversation, because my dad might say something funny that would go well in the intro. You got to constantly be tweaking, constantly having fun with it. And I just started a job at cool.fm. I'm going to throw that in there too. And some of my best episodes, I'm re-airing there. So Sunday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern, with my best guest from the Better Call Daddy show, which is further listenership. I am re-airing best episodes there. And that's even a perk for my guests, right? To
That's
do an
very
even
cool.
better job. Yeah.
Very, very cool. Yeah, that's great. That's great. And it's so nice to hear somebody speak like that, because you do read and get told a lot of advice as a podcaster, don't you? And it must be like this, and you must do this, and you must do that. And you're saying, look, I'm 3 years at this. I'm 300 episodes in, and oh, by the way, I'm airing it over here as well. And look, if it's a Thursday, it's a Thursday. So that's kind of really refreshing to hear sometimes, because sometimes you can be a little bit too rigid, can't you?
Let me tell you something else too. I got asked to keynote an event from my podcast. I mean, it's unbelievable the opportunities that have come my way. And I was so nervous. This was like a corporate event, and I wanted the titles to be creative. And I practiced it for multiple people that had been on my show. And I met with my Toastmaster coach, and I met with a couple public speaking coaches. And you know what? Nobody can tell your story like you. And when you try to fit into somebody else's formula, you are not relaxed. You are not yourself. And when I finally was just like, I know what I'm doing. I know who I am. Nobody can write this as well as me. Then it started being better. And it's the same thing with your podcast. You can get advice all day long, but the uniqueness factor is you. Same thing with radio bits. You can listen to other announcers and you can try to sound like them, but the more you talk about who you are, like I'm a mom, I've got 4 kids, 14 and under. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky. I'm a Jew from Kentucky. The things that are interesting and weird about me, nobody else has, just like the relationship with my dad. So lean into your unique path, your unique story, get advice from others, but make it yours.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it was James Bishop was telling me he does an awful lot of podcast producing too and advising companies on podcasts, and that they show up for you as much as the story, so there's a little bit about your own sort of personality, your own brand, your own, I'm going to use the word quirkiness, maybe in inverted commas, but there's something unique about each of us, isn't there, that people kind of either resonate with. And you can mention any sort of globally recognized person, and some people will love them, some people will hate them. But I think in the podcasting world, people turn up a little bit for you and a little bit to hear what you're talking about. It's kind of a mix. That's at least the way it comes across sometimes.
Oh, I 100% agree with that. And it's really funny too. You know, you can even see my personality in my headshots. Like I do Vogue moves, and in my interviews, you might see some awkward eyebrow movements, right? And people like that, right? As much as I might be uncomfortable with that in the beginning, the more you let loose, the more you let that shine through, people notice.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know a lot of people use the word authenticity a lot, but it's about just being you, isn't it? Being genuine and being who you are, and people do resonate with that. And let's go back to the word advice, because you can be flexible and agile and do all the sort of things, being you, and that's really important advice for people. But you're also helping people, aren't you, with their podcast? So can you tell me a little bit about that work?
Yeah. The more, like, you don't want to over plan, but you kind of need to know what goes into it, right? Before you get started. So you need to think about who your people are, right? Who are the people that you want in your universe, you want in your tribe, that you want to attract? If you think about your audience first, that's actually a big piece, right? Like, who are you connected to on social? Who's showing up for you on LinkedIn? Who's showing up for you on Facebook? Who's showing up for you on Twitter? Who are those people? The more feedback you get first, or the more you know your audience, or like what they want from you, then you can bring that, right? And I think that that also ties to your brand, right? Like, I'm a mompreneur. A lot of people in my audience are parents. A lot of people in my audience are entrepreneurs. So those are the types of guests that you might want to bring on.
Yeah, and I was talking to Sam Sethi, he works with James Cridland doing podcast news. They do a regular show. They cover sort of the podcasting landscape around the world. It's very popular. And Sam also owns a new company called PodFams, where they're trying to monetize content for podcasters in a very different, unique way. And he runs a radio station in London, in the UK. But it's quite interesting when you look at the sort of audience that you're trying to connect with, isn't it? And you say, well, most people, and the reason I'm bringing Sam up there, Sam Sethi, is because we had a discussion about pod fade, this term where people get
Oh,
very
yeah.
excited about starting a podcast and then haven't considered the things that you're talking about. Like, well, who is your audience, and what type of people are you trying to attract? And they've just got into podcasting because they love the idea of doing a podcast. But without those sort of concrete building blocks and without some kind of a process, it's very hard to have the consistency. You can't do 100 episodes in your first year as you did without some kind of workflow, right?
Yes, that's a very good point. And like I said, I started off 100 miles an hour because I wanted to like show people that I could cast it, and show people that I could market it, and show people that I could edit it. And then, hey, not only can I do that for me, but I can do that for you. And you mentioned the monetizing thing. Like, I think a lot of podcasters start off and they're like, "Oh, who would want to sponsor this?" But that's really I think, the backward approach. Monetization does not come for a while. And I think that people think that that happens like right away. It really goes back to nurturing your audience, really relationship building. And it's the podcasters that I love the most, they get that it's a long game, right?
Yeah, yeah,
They're methodical in what they're doing. And
yeah,
it's
yeah.
figuring out like which podcasting apps can you be featured in? Which newsletters are you signed up for that's talking about podcasting? Are you listening to the podcasts that are being featured by Apple? What are they doing right? How can you be a podcaster if you're not listening to other podcasts? How can you be a good host if you're not a good guest? You might want to guest on some other podcasts before you launch one of your own so you're comfortable telling your story and you're comfortable talking to other people.
That's a very good point. Yeah, that's a very good point. Like we were talking even before we hit the record button about audiences, weren't we? And one of the things that, just very quickly for people listening with the global discussion, we were kind of talking about. I feel a little bit guilty sometimes having a slight unfair advantage because I spent a couple of years doing long form interviews with the Global Interview, and we published over 400 interviews with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. It was a clear direction, a clear audience that we we're trying to tap into. And now what this is sort of the next step of that with video and audio. So that talks really to your point, isn't it? Knowing the audience that you're trying to reach. And it's about maybe building that community first before we start worrying about making a ton of money from it, or getting those sort of vanity metrics that people really want to get. And often people have said to me, look, you're better off getting 10 of the right people listening to it than 100 people who are going to listen once, make you feel good, and then they don't listen to it anymore. And then somebody else said to me recently that if you were a comedian on the stage and you had 1,000 people that you were going to do a show for that night, you'd feel like a pretty successful comedian. But you get 1,000 downloads on your podcast, and you go, oh, I wish I got 5,000. Oh, I wish I got 10,000, on that episode. And it's quite interesting how we get caught up in that trap of chasing the metrics when actually what the audience wants is good content and to show up for the person hosting it.
Right. And I think instead of focusing on how many downloads, it should be how many people have been on your show that are introducing you to other people? How many people have been on your show that are still in touch with you and listening to your show and collaborating with you in other ways a year later? What
Yeah.
is your retention, not your downloads? Like the retention is a bigger metric.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's about community and long-term relationships, because if you're in it for the short term, you just want to be a great podcaster. There's no future in that. That's the people that drop off. I see so many people start and then it just disappears after a few months because they realize how much work is involved.
And
Uh,
a lot of it too is like giving without expectation and realizing that it could come from somewhere else. Not constantly be like, hey, I did this for you, or hey, you know what I mean? But really just trying to do good for other people, like continuously.
100%. Yeah, 100%. Well, look, thanks for sharing that. We've learned a little bit about the Better Call Daddy podcast. We've talked about Jerry Springer, so we're covering some of the bases. It's really cool that you're also sort of putting out some of the best of the podcast as well out on the radio. It's fantastic to hear. But I want to change gear a little bit. I want to ask you some questions, not really rapid fire, but I'm interested in your views. Okay.
Cool.
Well, here we go. The first question for you, Reena, is your own way of learning, listening, absorbing information. Do you like audiobooks? You can't stand them? Do you like physical books, or you can't stand them? Do you just want to turn on Netflix at the end of a busy day because you've had enough with everything? Are you a visual learner? Do you like meeting people? Is it really the podcasting community where you get most of your information from? How do you onboard the information? How do you dissect what's important to you with the work that you do in today's busy, crazy, technology focused, rapidly moving world? So how does it work for you from an onboarding and learning perspective?
So I like physical books better than audiobooks, although I love podcasts. I listen to them when I drive, and a lot of times I'll listen to them when I'm running on the treadmill. Um, let's see, what was the other options that you gave me? Yeah,
Well,
the
some people say they
latch.
like to meet people in real life, or they actually get
Oh,
an awful lot of learning
definitely.
from just meeting people and having, in real life discussions.
Oh, definitely love in real life and events. I could even give you a couple examples lately. I just read a memoir called Available as Is by Debbie Weiss. This book was unbelievable and it gave me a great idea for an episode that I would have never thought of. So her father was widowed young and she was widowed young. So like father, like daughter. Crazy to grieve with your father through losing your mother. And were you even really able to grieve? And your grief was different because she was a kid. And then she married her high school sweetheart, was with this guy for 30 years. What's it like to lose a husband and grieve with your dad and then get back into the world when you've been with the same person for your whole, 30 years to date and to know who you are and to get back into the world and to stand on your own 2 feet. So I learned from that. And also I thought that that was a really unique daddy story. So that I loved. Podcasts, I like all kinds of podcasts. I like leadership podcasts, self-growth podcasts, but then I also like to be entertained. So one that I've been listening to lately, and I just had him on my show, it was called Discovering More by Benoit Kim. He was a policymaker turned psychotherapist turned podcaster. So lots of chapters there. He's a super interesting guy. And I always feel like I learned something. Another one I'm listening to is Everyday Espionage with Andy Bustamante and sometimes his wife, Jihi Bustamante. And they were former CIA. They started the CIA in the CIA together and left together. And they take the lessons that they learned from the CIA and they teach everyday people how to think like spies. So I think that's cool.
Well, that's some good recommendations for people. And the last thing, just on that question, then, in terms of learning styles as well, which is related to podcasting, we are seeing more and more things that are produced on television or movies that start off as a podcast. That's becoming a bit of a trend now. Have you any thoughts on that? Because as a medium, it's really continues to grow, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that guy I just mentioned got a TV series. He's wrapping up at the History Channel now, the Everyday Spy guy. Yeah. So again, and when I casted for America's Got Talent, we were combing YouTube. If you're getting a lot of streams on Spotify or you can be an independent artist, we are searching for you. If you've created a YouTube following, you can get cast for TV now. It's amazing. It's no longer 1-800-96 Jerry and people calling in with their stories. We are looking for people that are independent and creating community and audiences.
I love that you could just go 1-800-96 Jerry. I love that. It's ingrained, right? It's just in there.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Um, and we also see it the other way, don't we? Just very quickly. So we see people who have successful TV series, particularly with the way a lot of mainstream actors have now gone into sort of more TV with the streaming services and producing series. Whereas all of a sudden they realize that the audience wants more in between that weekly drop of the TV show. And so they put out a podcast where people really get into discussing it, don't they?
That is really cool. I mean, although I will say, it's kind of intimidating when you see all these A-listers coming out with podcasts. Or like, God, how can independents even compete with that? But they are.
100%. Yeah, 100%. Next question I've got for you, Reena, is real quick, but it's about people that you admire, because on this journey and all the wonderful experiences that you must have had, you must have bumped into people that have maybe helped you along the way, people that have inspired you, people that you've sort of looked up to. It might just be somebody who's given you a helping hand. So when I ask you that kind of question, what or who springs to mind?
There have been many people that I have been helped by, and that's why I try to hold the door for others. One story that I like to tell is, I went to a youth performing arts school. I didn't actually get in on my first try. my dad went to bat for me and was kind of like, what does she have to do? He went to the head of the music department and was like, okay, she might have not read all the fine print. And I took singing lessons and I learned how to read music, and I kept a singing teacher the entire 4 years. And after I got rejected that first time, and even though I got in on the second try after doing all of those things, I never really sang out, and it kind of took a bit of my confidence away. And I went to school with Nicole Scherzinger. I would love to interview her one day. I'm putting that into the universe. And on the last week of school, you audition for different art colleges that offer scholarship opportunities. And she sat in the front row and was like, this is your shot, Reena. Like, it's time to sing out. You've made it through the program. You know, you've sang in Carnegie Hall and you've sang at the graduation and the mayor's inauguration, and you've put up with this teacher for 4 years. This is it. You know, she was like, don't look at any of them. Look at me. You've got this. And I think that that is such an important message. Just that, like, I believe in you. I see you. Stop blending in. And I sang to her and she affirmed me, and I got 2 offers to 2 small liberal arts colleges. I ended up taking one because I really wanted to be wanted. And that really inspired me. And it's so honestly easy to do that for people when people are having a bad day or, you know, having trouble letting things roll off their shoulders. A simple message of just acknowledging that, or seeing that, or saying, stay strong. I've got you. That sucks. You know, stay with it. Keep going. Like, literally just those few things. I believe in you is enough. And we all need that more. Every one of us. And I've had people, even my own grandmother, who I love, she's 94. I'm so excited to go see her. She said something to me that I'll never forget in my whole life. She said, I love you more than anyone in this world. You know, and to have somebody tell you that, it's so simple, but it's so meaningful. And if you can make somebody feel that way, it really doesn't take too many people telling you that to keep you going.
I love that, Reena. That's wonderful. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, you're right. And again, it's back to that human connection, isn't it? That it's just about that sort of honesty, that connecting with people. And to hear that from Granny, really nice, you know, really nice thing to say. And I love that. Thanks for sharing that. The other thing I want to ask you about is, if people want to get into podcasting, we kind of covered a little bit of this earlier, but I want to get some real practical advice from you. So let's say somebody wants to get into podcasting and they're starting, they're a newbie, they don't know. If somebody was to say to you now, looking back over the last 3 years, 300 episodes of this real successful show, Better Call Daddy, and all your production background, experience, and knowledge, working on some of the biggest shows in the world, right? What advice would you give to somebody that's trying to get into this? You know, if you were saying, look, I do this, this, and this, and I wouldn't do this, well, where would you start with that advice?
One thing I would say is practice. Even before you let it out to the world, you could interview a best friend, you could interview a grandparent, you could interview somebody who loves you and is going to like be patient, right? So know who your cheerleaders are, pick one of them and practice. I mean, that's how I started. Was I interviewed a girl from college. We had kept in touch for 20 years. I knew that if I messed up with the technology, or I need to restate something, or it didn't flow perfectly, she'd give me a pass, right? So I would say, I was even thinking about this last night. Like, I would love to interview my grandfather, the one that's left alive. I've never done it. He actually listens to my show. He listened to my interview with Jerry Springer and wrote me a review, which is what all podcasters want. So I would say interview people who love you to start out with, and just record it, just practice, just try. And then another thing, and we mentioned this earlier, was guest on other people's show. I would say before starting your own, because it's a lot that you don't realize. It's a lot of marketing. It's a lot of editing. You don't have to edit it. But the longer that I've done it too, the more you research the guests, the better the conversation's going to be. But all of this is a process, and you have to enjoy the process. Like, every time I mess up, I literally sometimes like laugh at myself. I'm like, enjoying the process, baby, you know, like, so you got to have fun with it. You got to interview people in the beginning, I think, that will support you. And don't let the technology stop you. There's so many free options. You could do Anchor, you could do StreamYard, you could do Zoom. Zoom is free for 40 minutes. Start there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great
Yeah.
advice. And I think you're right. It's a bit about fun and learning. And I was having a debate recently with somebody about there's so much learning you can do before you begin, but then there's almost this other type of learning that happens while you're in motion. And I'm sure you've
Mm.
experienced that over the last 3 years.
Oh my gosh. Yes. So, one thing that I struggle with is asking for permission versus just going for it and asking for forgiveness after. So I believe, like I said, you were being generous beforehand. You're like, hey, this is edited. If there's anything that you say that you don't like, I'm not like that. Like, I like to go for the guts. You know what I mean? I want to know the juicy stuff. And so sometimes people overshare, and then afterward they're like, oh my god, can you cut that out? And so I really need to probably get better about being kind like you are. I've not aired probably 10 to 15 episodes out of 300 because people have felt like they've overshared or felt like they didn't feel comfortable with some of the questions. And I feel like cutting out chunks of the story takes away from the authenticity. And I'm like, look, I enjoyed the conversation. If you don't want me to air it, just let me know. Yeah.
Understood. Yeah. Well, listen, thank you, because that's wonderful advice to anybody interested in podcasting. And, that's not coming from somebody that just has a few thoughts on it. That's 3 years, 300 episodes of a very successful podcast. And also all that other experience that you're bringing along to the party. And you're advising people in this area. So thanks for sharing that advice with our audience today, Reena. And look, as we're coming towards the end of our time together here, because I could talk to you for weeks on end, but I do want to squeeze in two last questions. And number one is there anything else that you're working on? Is what's on the radar for the next 6, 9, 12 months? How does that work for you from a planning perspective? And the other question is obviously, if people want to get in touch with you, find out more about newsletters, podcasts, all the good stuff, where do you want to send them to?
I am getting ready to relaunch my website. I am lucky. I'm going to give Namecheap a plug because I won a contest, which is amazing. And they completely redid my website, which is going to help with SEO. And I had no idea like how much really goes into creating a professional website. Mine was more of like a landing page, but like you said, things happen when you're in motion. So you realize, wow, I could do blog posts about each guest, like you did long form interviews. I could make all of the images match perfectly or have like color themes, and I could use a copywriter and I could get a graphic designer, and 9 people worked on my new website. And I want it to be more interactive, where I might add like daddy's wisdom bits or ask my daddy a question or dad's stock picks for the week. Or there's just so many different ways that I could go with the website now. So that's coming down the pipe and I'm really excited about that. And to be honest, I'm really happy with where the podcast has gone, like organically, but I'm going to work on growing an email list and even more of a community. I've had a Facebook group for 3 years now. So you said, build the community first. I've got about 750 people in there. It's called Business Laughs and LinkedIn. And I believe that you need to have fun while having business. And LinkedIn is the first channel where I really built the majority of my following because I used it in my day jobs. And so I would like to grow that more. I would like to maybe do like more IG lives or more Facebook lives and just follow up with my guests after they've been on my show where we can talk about the episode or talk about what my dad said about them. So I would say you can find me on Twitter. That's how we met, at Reena with 2 E's. You can find me on the weekends on cool.fm. I am every Sunday from 12 to 6. And then you can hear Better Call Daddy on cool.fm at 10 p.m. Eastern for rebroadcasts of my best Better Call Daddy episodes. And I'm always up for music suggestions. It's a new station. There's a Saturday night dance party where they're always looking for what kind of dance party songs you like. And yeah.
Loving it. That's fantastic. And have you told dad that there's more work coming his way? Does he know?
My dad has really evolved through podcasting with me as well. I am so impressed that I feel like he learns from the guests and he's more comfortable even in his commentary. And to be honest, my favorite part about doing the podcast, besides, landing clients and getting to cast all of these amazing stories, is that I get special time with my dad and I will get to give that to my kids one day.
And you know what, Rena, that's a lovely note for us to end on. So thanks so much for sharing that. And look, that brings us nicely to the end of our time here today on the global discussion. Thanks to everybody who's watching or listening to us around the world. Make sure that you follow, like, subscribe, do all the things that I need you to do to help support this podcast. And of course, Better Call Daddy. And make sure that you join me back here for some more discussions with creatives and leaders and thinkers. And thank you so much indeed, Rena. It's been really nice to catch up with you today. Thank you for your time. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Simon. I could listen to your voice all day.
Thank you.